Well, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation because I didn't know what I was going to talk to you about. And I still don't know what I'm going to talk to you about. So that has a couple positive aspects, maybe some negative ones too. But one positive aspect is that I'll be interested in my own talk. I want to see what comes out. But secondly, I can respond to some things that were said. Now, first thing I have to do, since I don't have any notes or PowerPoint, I was told by Reverend Black that I have a certain job, so I better do my job. And he said, it's my job, you remember, to explain the defenses that we would have had to the criminal charges that were laid. It's interesting that they never charged anyone with violating the injunction, even though the judge who put the injunction in place was telling the OPP, they're violating the injunction, you have to do something about it. But they charged people with ordinary criminal offenses. And the offense that they charged everyone with was mischief by interfering with the lawful use of property. The lawful use of property. Now, one of the issues throughout this whole thing was whether or not Simcoe County Council had actually approved the final construction, and it was not clear. And my reading of the situation, of course, we have real experts here, the people who've been speaking before me who were involved in this for 20 years or 15 years. I just came in quick and got out quick. But from my understanding, the staff were manipulating this for whatever combination of reasons. And they didn't want it to come to a vote of Simcoe County Council, and it never really had approval for that final construction. And one of my tasks, I thought, in addition to, did I do the job now and explain what the defense would have been? It was not lawful. The construction that was interfered with was not lawful because it hadn't been properly approved by the county council. And that's what I wrote to Crown attorneys and argued with Crown attorneys over the phone. And they eventually stayed the charges against people, except for your two members, who they withdrew the charges against on the grounds that they were elderly rather than that they were members of your church, is my understanding.
and so increpid, as those of you who know them are well aware.
Right. In any event, this thing was being managed in an interesting way by staff. I don't follow city politics very much, any city or county, but I'm told that's pretty typical, actually. And it's something some people talked earlier today about, general lessons that should be learned about the way communities should relate to politicians, and they should be aware of that. Before I go on to more legal things, let me also say, I think one of the most important consequences of this struggle, and Reverend Black alluded to this too, was the way First Nations people and settlers and cottagers were all brought together. Those three groups of people have been historically divided at many times in places, obviously. And it was wonderful the way they came together in such a powerful way. And a lot of people told me, gee, they never realized about First Nations oppression until they were involved in this struggle. I learned a lot about First Nations oppression by being involved in the Ippewash Inquiry, representing some First Nations people. You may know about that. But all non-First Nations people have a lot to learn about the oppression that First Nations people undergo all the time. And it's amazing. In Simcoe County now, there is a kind of unity that doesn't exist anywhere else in Canada, I'm sure. And a kind of respect to First Nations people that's truly remarkable. That might be the most important consequence of this, maybe more important than the environmental consequences, which are also very important. Now, I didn't know much about Dump Site 41 in Tiny Township. I don't think I ever heard of Tiny Township before. And I got a phone call in July of 2009. Actually, I ended up getting two calls, one of which I got to later. The one I got to later was from Ann, and the one that I got to first was from somebody calling on behalf of Vicki Mineg. Now we're down to just about Site 41 people. There's just a few students left here, right? So, sorry, I'm going to be telling most of you stuff that you already know. But there was an injunction applied for and a suit for damages launched by the county against Ann and Vicky as the named people, and John and Jane Doe's referring to everybody else. They sued them for $160,000. They said that's what their blockades had cost them so far. And they also obtained a temporary injunction, and then it was to be returned to deal with whether that injunction should be made permanent until trial. And the injunction prohibited people from going to the site, to interfere with the dump trucks and so on. So I got a call like about January 23rd or something. Would I consider representing Vicky Meneg in dealing with that injunction application? And then July 25th, 2 days later, there was a big rally up there. And I ended up speaking to her, and we agreed we'd meet at that rally. It was a terribly rainy day, those of you who were up there. And the traffic was unbelievable getting up there. I'm always an early person, but it took me 5 hours to get there. I figured I'd get there an hour early, but there was a traffic accident on the 400 and stuff. It was unbelievable. So I got there, the rally was very much in progress, soggy, but in progress. And there were thousands of people there. I had to park way down the street. I couldn't believe how far I had to walk in the rain. But I did meet Vicky there, and I met some of the other people, and got involved in one of the important events of my life, it turned out. Because we have to realize those people who were there and those few people who weren't. This project was very far along. It had been going on for years. Estimates are they spent between $10 and $20 million already invested in the project. That's a big chunk of money. And there were people very committed to this project. And it was a done deal, it looked like. And it was a done deal, except for the amazing power that came together from all different directions. It's interesting how we all have our own perspectives as to what's the most important thing to emphasize. The Council of Canadians, Dale Goldhawk, the power of God, the power of Steve Ogden. There are all sorts of things that contribute to this. In my view, it's hard to say that any of them was inessential. It was such an uphill fight that maybe missing a little teeny piece might have ended it. So everybody should feel wonderful about their part in it. You know, I've been involved in a lot of struggles. I believe in these kind of struggles, and I thought when I first got called, well, there's another very worthy losing cause for me to be involved in. And my role is to try to help them lose as powerfully as possible, try and avoid criminal charges, and try and find their way through the legal nonsense that's put up. That's one of my important roles as a lawyer, I think. And you should all be very skeptical of legal verbiage, but there's lots of it around there, and I thought that was my job to help get through that. So we had to respond to this injunction application. I was representing Vicky, but I soon found that I was representing a movement, and Vicky was happy to be representing that movement. She wasn't that worried. She was a little worried about a $160,000 judgment against her, but her main concern, as everybody else's concern, was to stop that dump site. I was fortunate to have another lawyer working with me named Chris Reed, who some of you met in the course of this. And the two of us approached the injunction application from that point of view. How can we further the struggle? And within a couple of days, Steve Ogden was in my office down in Toronto, carrying boxes, as he was wont to do, just to intimidate me. Geez, I have to read all this stuff. And I had to read it all by next week. But he was a very good teacher, and he actually gave me an overview that cut through a lot of the boxes. One thing I thought I might talk a little bit more about here is this mod flow business. I don't know, among the students and non-Site 41 people, is there anybody who really knows as an expert about mod flow things? Do you people do any of that, hydrogeology? Or? Well, Steve gave me mod flow number 101, and then I told him I needed a graduate course too to really deal with this, so he put me in touch with a hydrogeologist who gave me the graduate course. And it's been a year ago, so I forgot a little bit of it, but I just want to summarize for you, because I think it's an interesting technical thing for those of you involved in these things more technically. I'm not sure what your interests really are. ModFlow is a canned program made by U.S. Geological Survey or something. It's available free on the internet, or it's souped up versions which you can pay software companies for. It's a program for analyzing water flow in situations like this to see about environmental dangers. Now, it's a canned program, and what you do if you're a hydrogeologist using that program is you get the canned program, you do some measurements from the site of various things, I don't know what, and you input data into that program from measurements in the site, and then you get some output which predicts certain things about the site. I don't know, I'm telling you all I know, but I'm quite sure it's an accurate overview. You get outputs, and then you get outputs from the program, but then you measure against the actual situation and see, and you'll be off, and you put back in the true values of the things that you measured, and then it recalibrates, and you get other output, and you go back and forth like that until you, the hydrogeologist, are satisfied that you have a good model of this site. Once you have a good model of the site, you then do various experiments with that model. What about if we had very heavy rainfall of this amount? What would that do as far as the water flow and so on? That's the rough idea. Now, in doing this, I gather I'm a mathematician. Mathematics is a very, very precise science. It's the only really precise thing in the world, and that's wonderful, except that means it doesn't really apply to any real life things. If you can apply it to real life things, you have to make assumptions and so on. These models and the applications, they're described by people in the field as a combination of art and science. It's not formulaic as to what you put back in and what you do. You use your judgment. You say, well, try this, we'll modify this a little bit, see what happens. Different, very competent people would do it differently. But if they're really competent, they would each do a good job and get a reasonable model and get reasonable outcomes, hopefully, when they use the model to test the problems. Now, in this case, there was a firm, Jagger Hims, mentioned this morning as providing some of the pictures that we saw this morning. They not only did the model, the calibrated model, but they were also the company that was doing the project. They had a very big interest in this project continuing, like millions of dollars of interest. If somebody else had done an analysis that would have shown that this project would have to stop, they would have been out millions of dollars. And in the course of, towards the end of this saga, they were bought out by Genevar, which is a huge operation like this, and they're now a little wing of that. So the Community Management Committee in general, and Steve Ogden in particular, after consulting with their own expert, said they wanted this calibrated model. They wanted to get the computer program that had been produced in order to have their expert examine that, see if he thought it was a good model, do some experiments with it, and so on. Now, the first reaction of Jagger Hims, and reported to the Community Management Committee by the aforementioned Rob McCullough, was that, well, this is very complicated stuff, and if it's used by the wrong kind of person, they could get erroneous results, and we just have to deal with that, and so we really don't want to give it to you. But then the same Rob McCullough did admit under cross-examination during the injunction application that Charles, what was his name, Steve?
Dr. David Charlesworth.
Charlesworth, yeah, was certainly an expert. So that reason didn't add up, that it might be misused by somebody who didn't understand. They had an expert that they had put forward, right? So then they stopped using that reason after a few months. And they said, well, it's not really ours. I mean, you want us to give it to you, but it belongs to Jagger Hims. Sorry, We just can't give it to you. Now, Simcoe County had paid for Jagger Hims to calibrate that model. My understanding of engineering principles and that type are you pay for it, it's yours. But they didn't push it through in that way, and then there was a saga of a couple of years through the Information and Privacy Commission, and the account given in the so-called fact sheet that was distributed here is not factual. It's very misleading, extremely misleading. There's no question in my mind that Simcoe County unconscionably tried to keep this, and did keep it, from the Community Management Committee. And finally, when the Information and Privacy Commission ordered that they make some attempt to get it from Jagger Hims, and they said, including even maybe suing Jagger Hims for it, they said, well, we can't decide that. All of a sudden, the staff, who'd been manipulating everything about Site 41 for years without bringing it to the council, said, we can't deal with that question without a meeting of council. And unfortunately, let's see, the next meeting of council is August 25th. This is like in early August. August 25th. Well, we can't get the materials ready by then. There's a meeting in September. Well, so if we could we could get the materials ready by October of 2009. That's what they wrote back to them. Well, the fact of the matter was they had planned to have the construction complete by October. The construction was well in progress. And they were just trying to impede the thing. And it was unconscionable the way they did that. And that's not described in here, but it is described under oath. If you want to get some insight into this, some insight that I got into this, you can read the cross-examinations of Rob McCullough and Mark Aiken and Glenn Knox, the three main Simcoe County officials, about these issues. And those cross-examinations are available on the Site 41 website, as is a huge amount of other information. If you guys got interested in this question, you non-Site 41 people, you should check out their website and you'll see all sorts of interesting stuff on there. But including, read those transcripts. I invite you to read the transcripts and compare what they say in those transcripts to the so-called fact sheet about the mod flow that was distributed here today. And you know, in the fact sheet about the mod flow, they say, as if it's a wonderful thing, we spent $130,000 having a gathering for 3 days where we investigated with the mod flow. They did that instead of giving the mod flow, instead of giving the calibrated model. And that's what they all want to do. They give you vacuous presentations. Like I'm told, I wasn't here this morning, but I'm told there was a video from Mr. McCullough this morning. Same kind of thing that people in Simcoe County have had to put up with for years. They ask concrete questions and they're given general flashy PowerPoint and other kinds of presentations that don't deal with the real issues. And they use taxpayers' money to do that obfuscation. It's really quite remarkable. So our main job during the injunction application, it appeared to us, was to try to uncover some of this, and you can read the transcripts and see the extent to which we did. But then also it became clear, we're now in August of 2009, about August 13, I think, 13 or 14, we're in court. There's a meeting of Simcoe County Council on August 25th. Some councilors were going to bring a motion to have a moratorium at that meeting, a moratorium on to vote on whether or not there should be a moratorium on construction. But it was clear to me from my cross-examinations of the officials and also from talking with lawyers that they weren't going to let that come to a vote. What their plan was for August 25th to manipulate things, as they've been doing for years, and say, oh, so some councilor would bring forward a motion, they'd say, oh yes, thank you, that motion will be taken as a notice of motion for our September meeting. That's what they were going to do, no question about it. And by September, they'd say, well, that's a nice motion to have a moratorium, but the construction is done. That was the plan. So it turned out one of the things that we were able to do was to negotiate that we would not oppose the injunction any further. We would acquiesce in the injunction staying in place on the understanding that several things would happen at the August 25th meeting, including if there was a motion about a moratorium, it would be allowed to be voted on at that time. So, Reverend Black, I appreciate your slide that mentioned me in a positive way, but it's a little bit more than I didn't quite negotiate what you suggested. You suggested, I think, that I negotiated there be a moratorium. What I negotiated would be that they'd be allowed to vote on a moratorium. But I was glad that we did that, because I really do think August 25th would have been more obfuscation if that hadn't happened. So, from my perspective, it was wonderful for me, and I really thank you people, to be involved in this struggle, because I hope not only did it end very well for you and your people, but I hope that more people find out about it and get inspired to realize that if you do build a powerful movement, but you have to build a very powerful movement, and those of you who weren't there have seen some of the power here today, and there's other people out there who aren't here today too. But you've seen some of these remarkable people in front of you today, and you can realize that there was pressure from so many different directions. But it can be done. Even what looks like a done deal that they've spent millions of dollars on can be undone if people really unite. And that's the wonderful lesson of this. And I hope Kate Harries writes the book that'll make the world learn that lesson from this.